Hi, welcome to Byte Size Learning with Arts Access North Carolina. I'm Michaela. I am a white woman with black hair, and I'm wearing red lipstick and a black sweater. Today, we are joined by visual artist Jean Gray Mohs. Jean Gray Mohs is a North Carolina native and a visual artist who intricately melds science and spirit in her abstract creations. Her work is deeply informed by the personal journey through chronic illness and past disability, resulting in art that explores emotional and physical vulnerability and her resilient human spirit.
Hi, I'm Jean Gray Mohs. I wish I had on beautiful red lipstick like Michaela. I'm a white woman with brown hair. I'm very chilly, so I have on some green mittens and a purple fur around my neck, red glasses on my head. And I'm so happy to be here with you, Michaela, and with you, Kirk, interpreting today.
Thank you for joining us today, Jean Gray. Do you want to tell us a bit about where your story begins?
Sure. So, as you can see in this hilarious photo of me at age 5, this was my very first exhibition. I was one of the children that didn't nap in kindergarten, and my teachers let me stay up and make art during that time, and then allowed me to have a kind of a special spotlight on an exhibition the end of my kindergarten year. And I've really been making art ever since, which sounds, you know, cheesy maybe perhaps, but in middle school, I was painting hyper-realistic landscapes. I was drawing pastel portraits of my family that were realistic, and that's kind of the beginning. And I've been making ever since that time. Yeah, the picture on the right is a picture, I guess, of a woman with a hat on and a black shirt standing next to a sculpture made out of plywood, tan plywood, that comes up to my shoulder and represents a little bit of the work that I'm making now. Yeah. All right. So, something about my work since I've been 5 is something that keeps kind of the thread of my work together through all this time is thinking of work as object as vessel, process as catharsis. There's an artist living today and writer. She does some really great books, has essays from living artists, how they make a living. Her name is Sharon Loudon. One of the books, Living and Sustaining a Creative Life. There's a quote in there that I really love. I think it really carries a lot about through the work I've made through the years. It says the power of creativity does not just lie in an artist's work, but also in how he or she continues to create regardless of the obstacles life places in the way. I think this represents kind of a lot, almost every body of work I've done in my adult life, which I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about here in a minute.
Do you like to tell us a bit about your early work?
Yeah, so earlier work that I'm not going to share too much about here represents a few different things. I guess a little bit like I spoke about before, some sort of like hyper realistic pastels and landscapes, but it also represents sort of a time when I was a part of a group called the Still More Roots group. We did a lot of like installation work. We did 10 years in this managed pine forest down in Georgia where we would reflect on the environment, use sort of like materials you wouldn't necessarily usually use. My first year I had work there, I had work made out of leaves and moss, and made from work like that. But work now kind of has moved into this theme that I was talking about before, thinking about like object as vessel, process as catharsis. So on the left-hand side of the screen represents loss. I've experienced a lot of loss in my life, and artwork has always been a place that I've been able to carry these big, heavy moments. Thinking of object as vessel, right? A place to hold these things. So on the left of the screen, you see a woman standing in a pine forest, referencing the Still More Roots group, the managed pine forest down in Georgia. This is one of the years I did a piece. You see the woman standing in a black tank top with a brown skirt looking over to her left. And to her left is this, how do I describe it? It's this kind of room, transparent room that you could walk into and into this kind of hole. It's these tiny fragments of paper that are stitched together. And on every single piece of paper is written the words, "I miss you." So when you step into this room, it kind of surrounds you. You hear these sounds as it's kind of sweeping around you. It kind of hits your skin. It's very uncomfortable, but you can kind of step out of it a little bit. So here I was dealing with grief, or trying to deal with grief, trying to carry this really big emotion that, carries through so many years, but trying to articulate what that feels like. In the center of this image, you'll see a picture of three children. One child is kind of disintegrating into the background. You only really see the outline. The piece is made with a black ballpoint ink pen. So there's no erasing that could be done. Every kind of mistake is there, made in one sitting. This piece was also thinking of loss and memories, and how over time they start to sort of degenerate. They start to sort of disappear into time. On the right of the image, you see it says birth. There are 3 images, all done in watercolor. When my children were in the womb, I needed to process feelings of like bounty, fertility, growth, all of these things. And so in order to really embed myself in these feelings, I focused on thinking of like traditional women's work of like, used to be just still lives. So here you see 3 still lives, just the object itself kind of singularly. We have 2 lemons at the top, an avocado sliced in half, although you see 2 seeds in the middle, and then a purple pinkish peony in the bottom. So this is me really thinking of birth of my twins, who are now going to turn 10 this month, and are hopefully not going to make too much noise since they're out of school today listening to a movie downstairs. But keeping moving kind of in this vein, motherhood, going into the motherhood. Now you see kind of the left of the screen. It became, maybe I had a little postpartum, became kind of hyper isolating. And so I did a series about motherhood called Structural Findings. I did 7 images. Each image was of one room of my house. And I was thinking about, like, as if you were above our house, like, what would you see in like movement, as constellations of movement of my children and I in these very domestic spaces. So the images, there's 3 images on the left, kind of creating sort of an atmospheric feel. The sort of like mustard yellow gives a framework of where a door might be, or a wall. And behind this sort of like very flat plane, you see this broad movement of sort of charcoal sweeps. I had taken some instruments and sort of carved lines into the paper to show sort of patterns of movement, and then kind of charcoal rubbings on top to show them as a little bit of a relief. But this was really thinking about motherhood and all the effects that it had on me. So like I was saying before, so this work was from 2015. So in my adult life, you can kind of see these things kind of playing out. Bodies of work really follow this idea of, what do I need to have help me carry, or what needs to be held outside of myself, or what do I need to process? And then that kind of leads on the right-hand side of the screen here to disease. Disease is, I'm really thankful to be in conversation with Arts Access, because being the first like inaugural exhibition there, I didn't really realize like how reflective that was going to be to me. And it's been a really, really hard but good month, sort of like looking back, because if I think about disease, I've had an illness since I was 19. I'm 45 this past year. So, time being sick has eclipsed sort of time of being healthy. And so this kind of was a really poignant part of my disease in 2019. So on the right of the screen, you see 3 images, 2 of which are close-ups of a work I started doing with acrylic, pastel, and thinking about the body work's called 12 to 20, an adult at rest, because the idea is an adult can have 12 to 20 breaths a minute. And so it's thinking about what could be held in like one breath, because each, to me at that time, I had lung disease, was very precious. So it's thinking about this, like allowing a loss of control, allowing like what beauty could come out of that, leaving kind of obstacles on the page to allow, like, once you've been dragged through it, like how are you transformed? So the images that you see are kind of like really bright colors with washes. They're kind of transparent. There are lots of layering. There's a high contrast in a few of the pictures. The bottom one has some really vivid blues. The tops had some tans and pinks. So as you can see, kind of moving through the work kind of really narrates my story. So I do often call myself a narrative abstract artist. In this screen here, we see 2018 to 2022. I really love looking at this because if I think about some of my favorite artists through time, the thing that I love the most is I can see you have the treat of looking at their life and being able to see how their gears work and how they transfer from like one body of work to the next. And I think looking back at even my own work here and seeing like, oh, this work I was making in 2018, how it now informs the work I'm making in this image to 2022, which is still the work I'm making now in 2024, but how like each step matters, right? Like in 2018 here, so when I was really sick, things were out of control. I was working with really easy stuff I could just pull out that were just accessible to me. I was in oxygen. I could just pull it out of the drawer, easy watercolor, easy on paper, easy cleanup, right? I had my surgery in 2019, had a double lung transplant. And then after that, it's like, I'm not as fragile as I once was. I need the work to represent strength. I needed the work to be rigid. And so I started working with plywood, thinking about organs, thinking about moving towards this idea of woven strangers, the transplant kind of life. And then moving forward, thought, why am I boxing myself in? Why am I keeping myself in a rectangle? Which makes me move to the work I'm in now, which is thinking about this idea of woven strangers and bringing together two bodies that were born separately, but are now, inextricably like woven together. Yeah. And I'll kind of pause there for any clarifications if Michaela had any. If I missed something, I may have missed my cues to describe some of these works, but
Could you describe some of these images on the screen for us?
yeah. So on the left-hand part of the screen, there are 9 smaller images. These are bright, colorful, sort of organic, abstract objects. You'll see maybe sometimes these are like very, very referential to our organs. So they're sort of like, imagine like a minimal lung on its side in hot pink. And then below it, sort of a hanging separate piece of plywood and like a red and tan that's been bound together with the wax thread that would describe one of these 9 images. But they each are bound sort of similarly with the wax thread being the only thing holding it together, with sometimes contrasting colors. An image might be like a center image of these 9 is blue on top, orange on the bottom. And transplant is not always a beautiful outcome. So I like to think about honoring people who've gone on in the transplant community that I know. So sometimes images are contrasting, like there's an image with really dark blue, and then on the right, it's sort of a lighter orange color. But sometimes I like pieces to have colors that are in harmony together, because I feel like I'm a success story. So like a bottom right one almost mimics like a heart. Lots of these little pieces really tightly bound together, but it's a really nice color scheme that's very similar to each other, like these light greens, these light pinks, these light oranges, and this light tan that's the natural plywood. So that describes just a few of them, but each are their own kind of color scheme that come to me in the moment when I'm making. There's a bigger piece on the top right, which on the left, there's bright yellows, bright greens, a splash of pink. And on the right is a dark, dark blue, a light blue, and this sort of wave of a piece made of plywood with a negative shape cut out, kind of showing like a tide-like feeling.
Yeah. We'd love to hear a bit about your process and how your process has evolved over time.
Yeah. So one thing I always love to shout out is my professor in college. His name was or is Greg Carter. He gave me this one thought, which is really simple, but for some reason it was really expansive to me. And thinking about where do you begin when you're making? Is it with an idea or is it with the material? And I find that I always start with the idea and then the material comes second. So I think that has a lot to do with like why you see through the work, the material changes so much, is that you need to find the material that's able to carry the message the best way possible and whatever that way it needs to be.
Yeah.
But as far as my process for making the work that I am currently making, Woven Strangers, that's currently on display at Arts Access, um, is made in this way. I really like to start with sketching. Sketching is a really huge part of how I make. I pretty much carry a sketchbook with me wherever I am because everywhere you are, there's there's shapes to be discovered. I love looking at the parts, you know, the negative spaces in between, you know, body parts as people are standing around. I like looking at positive shapes and architecture and then foundations. I mean, it's just looking at branches, the shapes between branches. It's just everywhere. You know, you can just collect them at any time. It's just they're so available to you. So I'm a collector. I draw them all the time. Here in the left of the screen, you see a child in a pink black jacket and a boy in a green jacket crouched by a creek. And then in the foreground, you see my gloved hand, because I always get cold, and my sketchbook. And you can see even here sort of the lines I've drawn mimicking the rocks in the ground where my children are playing. And to the right, you see me sitting crouched from the sort of an aerial perspective. See the top of my head. I have a tan jacket on. You see my sketchbook, and then you see water in front of me. Because often I like to take my kids out and about, and I'll just sit and collect the things that I see in nature around me as well. And as far as my process, it's a multifaceted process. There's a lot of steps to making the work that go from sketching it out to spending a day to paint, to spending a day to cut shapes, to spending a day to sort of like puzzle the shapes, like who fits together. Sometimes I'll make a shape and it won't find its piece for like 6 months. So the puzzling is also part of my process. And then, of course, the stitching. So the drilling, the stitching, the sewing. Then there's a process of sort of balancing. The pieces all have their sort of perfect fulcrum from where they hang. That's a big important part of the message for me because it's still talking about this idea of chronic illness and disability, and this idea that like any shift in one's life, those of us living with chronic illness can understand any small shift can sometimes throw you completely off balance pretty quickly. So I like that to be present in the work. I think that's really important. I showed sort of a video, a quick little video here that sort of just walked through a little bit of those steps and showed those things in action. I like to start pretending I'm a woodworker these days. I guess I can claim it. It's been 5 years or so, but I regularly use a lot of power tools, scroll saws, jigsaws, drill, bandsaw, orbital sander, needle, wax bookbinding thread. I've recently have started moving in a direction of thinking about less of organs and more of like skeletal and skin. So I've started working at a local place to do welding and forging. So you can look to see work kind of coming that's going to be a little bit more rigid, even stronger than the work that I've been doing. And then as far as my influences, I'm really influenced by everything around me. But I do have a love for some certain women, contemporary artists that I really would love to just shout out. If you're not familiar with Shannon Finnegan, she's really amazing. She does a lot. She uses a lot of her process and her work for advocacy for disability. She's pretty well known, so you've probably heard of her, but if not, I would say look her up. The picture is in the top left of the screen up here. It's a picture of a blue bench, and it says, "I'd rather be sitting. Sit if you agree." Love that. She just did, I believe, this really incredible exhibition where if you think about like if you've ever been to like a rotating sushi restaurant where like the sushi rotates around to you, she did a piece where the artwork will rotate around to you. So you just have to sit and it comes to you. It's just so beautiful. Another artist I really love, her name is Andrea Zattel. She has something out in Arizona, I think called A to Z Projects. But the work I really fell in love with her about is thinking about material minimalism. I guess she grew up maybe moving in a van a lot. And so like she likes to create these spaces that has everything you need, these really compact compartment spaces. I just love her work. So her image I show here looks like it's a bed, an office, all
Yeah.
made from plywood, green cloth. Love her. Another artist I love, who's I think even younger than me, in Australia. Her name's Amy Clear Mills. There's this body work she did called Unsolicited Advice that is just clever, humorous, really brings attention to something, kind of comes from the backside so you really get your attention. But it's a whole exhibition of these pillows that is like, have you tried yoga? Or just all of this, when people are sick and they're like, think they know all the answers and think they're being very helpful, but sort of unsolicited advice. It's just terrific work. And then there's another artist, CJ Hendry, who I really admire, just for her marketing skill and originality. She's really out there. So I don't know if you've probably seen her work before, but these are some women I think I'd just love to give a shout out to that I admire. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as far as, I know that Byte Size Learning obviously sometimes has an educational component. So I have made a guidebook for process as catharsis, object as vessel. So I thought maybe what we could do together is start part of it. And if you wanted to continue with it, it's on my website for you to go and discover if you'd like. All right, so we're back. We took a minute to bring this up so you wouldn't have to wait through all my technical issues. So as far as process as catharsis, object as vessel guidebook, it's sort of 4 sections to kind of walk you through, similar to the process that I go through. So if this is something you're interested in, I'd love you to come along on the journey. If not, that's fine too. But we'll start by just thinking of section 1, which is to kind of identify. And if you're thinking of object as vessel, process as catharsis, you're thinking about something that you feel is too heavy for you to carry on your own, and something to process. And the beginning of this sort of step to identify something is to think about making an object that, later on you could throw in the trash can. That might be part of the catharsis. Later on, you might set it on fire out in a place that wouldn't catch anything else on fire. Like, I'm not saying catch something on fire, but it just might be something you need to just make and get rid of and no one ever see, right? It could be that it's something that you make that you're proud of, that you put on the wall that symbolizes, something you're really proud of. It doesn't have to be that this object, this vessel you're thinking about making, has to be a negative influence. Like if you think about the work I made about my kids, right? It's because I was like centering myself and this really positive feeling, right? So it was really healthy for me in that like 9-10 month period to really focus on that positivity. So what I want to do right now is I just want to talk you through kind of identifying something. If you wanted to work on a piece, a painting, a drawing, it's up to you, a weaving, and then we'll kind of start there. So as part of this workbook, it says here, identify, right? Next it says, this is your path, right? That's what the beauty of it is. Like we each have an important story to tell. We each have our own style. If all of us were to draw a cat, the cat would look different. And that's your style. And it's not good or bad. It just is. Like that's what's really beautiful about the way everybody makes their work. So next is sort of identify what you'd like to process. So what do you need or want your object to hold or carry for you? Like I mentioned before, is it the joy of, a birth? Is it, reaching a goal? Is it maybe coming out to a family member? Is it maybe getting a diagnosis? Is it, finishing physical therapy? Conquering a fear? I mean, it could be anything. Did you make a recipe? I don't know. It just could be anything you want it to be. Or could it be something else entirely, something that harnesses pain, fear, right? Something harder to talk about, something harder to capture with words. Sometimes it's just more of like a feeling. It could be any of these things. So we won't sit with you here for 15 minutes, but what you can do is time yourself when you take 15 minutes and just like do a free write. If you feel uncomfortable writing, record yourself. If you feel uncomfortable recording yourself, scribble it. You know, this is not for anyone else. It's just for you. But sit down and sort of get it out of your body, get it out of your head. I know sometimes I will spiral out on things, but it's just a place to sort of get it out. And if 15 minutes isn't long enough, do it longer. Have multiple sittings. You know, there's no wrong answer with this. But I would start with 15 because it gives you a little bit of time for your mind and your judgment to relax, right? If it doesn't feel like enough, like get a whole notebook, right? But just sit down and do it. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about any of that, right? And so take out your phone, take out your something, get a piece of paper, instead of 15 minutes and begin. All right, so now at this point, you've given yourself some time to write or sketch freely, right? And so now's the time to really look back on it. And this is bigger than just, you know, this moment doing this. But now that you spend some time, come back maybe on it tomorrow and start to look at it with different eyes. Is there a word that you repeated a lot? Is there some sort of like constellation of certain stories or topics that came up that you didn't realize were as big as they were? Were certain words written bigger or sloppier that stand out? You know, was there, if you were drawing, is there a harder, harsher line that stood out? If you were recording yourself, is there a place where you got more quiet or louder? You know, start to sort of recognize these little moments that are standing out a little bit more than others. And focus on that theme, right? Just single out that one thing. Once you've done that, I want you to start picking it apart a little bit more. Do a little bit more of a deeper dive, right? If you look at that one word, whatever it might be, for me, it might have been loss, or maybe it was motherhood, or maybe for me, it was disease. Maybe for you, it was something else. Think about that one word. What's the first gut feeling when you think of that theme, right? Is it a light theme, right? Is it a light theme? Like a light theme could be maybe a watercolor, a lighter material. Is it a heavy topic, right? Could it be maybe made out of wood? You start to see what I'm saying. You might start to see, even reflected in my own work, how I made choices for material, right? Is it quiet, your word? Is it loud? Is it timid? Is it joyful? Do materials start to arise to think that might be reflective of these things? If you had to pick a color to represent it, what might it be? Would it be glossy? Would it be really, you know, fancy? Could it be a darker color, a natural color? Maybe it doesn't need any color at all. Maybe it's just the color of the material. Start to think about, you know, be really intentional about your choices. If you look and if you go to any gallery, the artist is doing those things. They're being really intentional about their choices, which is why it's always really fun to come and look at artwork, because you can start to dissect it like a detective. What have they, you know, why did they make this choice? Why is this color there? Why is this mark here? Why is it this big? Why is it this small? All of those things you can apply to the word that arose for you, right? And then from there, you can kind of continue to grow in thinking about these things. As I said before, this workbook kind of will walk you through sort of choosing materials, section 2, section 3, process is catharsis, section 4, object is vessel, kind of the finale. And I don't know if we have all that time for it today, but I did want to leave that as sort of like an extra, if that's something that you would like to continue to work on yourself. All right, so this was just the start, like I said before. If you want to go into depth more, I think it's like $10, and that's just really to support the work for a digital copy of the workbook. This is just shows what it looks like on my webpage. I believe you can find it where it says like artist support. It's the second number right here. It says object is vessel, process is catharsis. And you just add to cart, and it's a digital workbook that you can just get printed out. The website is at the bottom. If you want to be able to find this, it's www.my4dots.com/artist support.
Thank you so much, Jean Gray, for joining us today. It was great hearing about your story, your process, and all of your work. Jean Gray's show, Woven Strangers, is currently on display at Arts Access Gallery until May 18. And don't forget to join us in the gallery on April 13th for her Artist Talkback.
Thank you so much. It's Kirk, your dream. Thank you so much. And Michaela, I really appreciate you keeping me on, I don't know, keeping me in shape, making sure I'm saying what I need to say. As far as upcoming things I have going on, find me at Arts Access right now for Woven Strangers. Jamila Dallas has curated a really beautiful exhibition at Peel in Carver right now, which is sort of for locals. I have a piece that handcrafted in the Imperial Arts Center in Rocky Mount. And coming up, I'm going to have a couple pieces in something called The Middle Path, which just kind of talks a little bit about the work we talked about today. But at the Blanc, I'm not sure, in New York City. And then coming up in 2024, open source at Wilma Daniels in Wilmington, North Carolina. And please connect with me. Love to be connected. You can see my information here at JG.4dots. I'm also in Studio 205 at Art Space. Love a visitor. Come by anytime. But it's been a treat. Thank you so much for having me, Arts Access and Michaela. And thanks so much for y'all's time.